Welcome. This is an amazing turnout for a Tuesday morning at 9:45 a.m. I'm Justin Boyan. I'm the president of Climate Action Rhode Island. Very happy to see you all. A couple words about me. I was born in 1970. At that time, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 325 parts per million. Today, it's 422 parts per million, 30% thicker blanket trapping heat on our planet. When I was born, there were 9 billion birds in North America. The Audubon Society says there are now 6 billion. So habitat loss and climate change is wreaking havoc, not just on birds, but every ecosystem, every species on Earth, including our own. I have 3 quotes from yesterday's United Nations report, the IPCC. They say, climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health, parentheses, very high confidence. Right, these are scientists. This is an international consortium of scientists. They're not shooting from the hip. There is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. Very high confidence. Continued emissions will further affect all major climate system components, and many changes will be irreversible. Without urgent, effective, and equitable mitigation and adaptation actions, climate change increasingly threatens ecosystems, biodiversity, and the livelihoods, health, and well-being of current and future generations, which is us and our kids and our grandkids and the next 1,000 years of humanity, all depending on the next decade of urgent, effective, and equitable action. So why are we here today as part of this national action against banks? Well, just to name one, JPMorgan Chase. They have $3.8 trillion in assets. They're bigger than the entire economy of France. Since the adoption of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, JPMorgan Chase has provided more than $382 billion in financing for fossil fuel companies, including $65 billion to the top 20 companies engaged in the greatest amount of fossil fuel expansion. And again, the UN has said even existing fossil fuel infrastructure without additional abatement would exceed the remaining carbon budget we have to sustain humanity and our planet's ecosystems. In spite of that $65 billion from Chase alone to the top 20 companies expanding fossil fuel exploration. And this climate criminal, Chase Bank, is in the process of opening 20 branches in Rhode Island. So we're here trying to defend our planet. I'm so pleased to welcome Gayle Gifford, who is leading a new project and launching an incredible effort under the umbrella of Climate Action Rhode Island to call attention to the investments being made by our municipalities and our nonprofits here in Rhode Island in these planet-destroying banks. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gayle.
Thank you, everyone, for coming this morning. Thank you to the press. I also want to acknowledge Sue Anderbaugh, who's my city council member from Ward 3 in Providence and chair of the Sustainability Committee. Sue has a long environmental record, and we thank her very much for being here this morning. So Justin gave you a little bit of why we are here. A number of us heard a call a few months back from Bill McKibben to re-engage with climate action and certainly protecting our democracy as well. And his call was in particular to those of us over 60 who had been involved in lots of activism over the years, whether that was anti-Vietnam War, civil rights, human rights, anti-nuclear weapons and nuclear power, that now was the time not to sit on our butts during retirement or near retirement, but in fact to re-engage and get active on this life-threatening, humanity-threatening issue around global climate warming or climate chaos or the climate crisis that we're in. And Justin gave you some of those numbers. So we brought a bunch of folks together to explore with them what it was that we felt we could do to kind of add to the equation here in Rhode Island. CARI, Climate Action Rhode Island, and other groups like Sunrise, and there have been fossil fuel divestment groups at some of the colleges and universities back a number of years ago. We're really focusing on the sort of 4 big banks and people's banking and individuals, and thinking about the choices individuals make. After many conversations, we decided that the place that we could come down and add to the equation was on divesting or decarbonizing banking and investments in nonprofit organizations, the top 100 nonprofit organizations in the state, and the municipalities. Why did we choose them? Well, one, they both have public benefit as their purpose for existing, so we thought that was an excellent reason. 2, we felt that we had the most leverage in those areas through our memberships, through our participations on boards of directors, being constituents. So those all seem to make sense. We chose the groups because they have a lot of money in banks and investments in the state. And so we needed to connect with them. And also their board members our staff and leadership of corporations and businesses throughout the state. And so by focusing on the nonprofits, we hope that we, in fact, will be leveraging that work in order to move some of our companies as well. So as Justin mentioned, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out yesterday with, how many? I mean, this is just dozens of reports, right, that they've issued, each one more urgent than the next one. And we continue to see leadership acting as if there is no crisis, our leadership. So this divestment campaign that we're calling on to get people, these municipalities and top nonprofits, to move their banking out of the top funders of fossil fuel expansion in the country, and also to get their investments out of both the banks and other fossil fuel investments. And so that's what we're looking to do. When we thought about that, we said to ourselves, well, I wonder who's done anything, right? Who's done anything so far? And we know that RISD has divested, so the Rhode Island School of Design has. We know that Brown University has. The City of Providence Council, the City Council back in 2013 passed a divestment resolution. We just don't know whether that got acted on by the city at all. And Sue's in the process of, she's new council member, investigating that for us. And we know there are a few other little things around the state. But we said, well, there should be a list. I mean, we should know what people have done, right? That there should be something out there. So we said together, let's start a report card. Let's do a sort of state of the state, focused on the municipalities and on the top 100 nonprofits, to see where their banking is. Are they in one of the top banks funding fossil fuels, expansion, growth, and continuation? And the other was, are there investments there? So we sent a week ago really, access to public records requests to every municipality in Rhode Island. And we've heard from seven cities right now, cities and towns. So Warren was the very first to respond to us. Newport, Exeter, Richmond, Cumberland, Barrington, and Portsmouth have responded to date. Guess what? Nobody has a divestment policy in any of those, and a number of the towns do have their banking with some of the banks on our list. So we're waiting for the others to come. Surveys just went out to that top 100 nonprofits just at the end of last week, so they just would have received them at the beginning of this week, and we hope they don't throw our mail away. We sent them to the CEOs and to the board presidents to ask them a short survey on where they do their banking and investing, and had they considered policies on fossil fuels and divesting and made the choice. We know a couple people actually have made a choice not to in the past, Rhode Island Foundation being one of them, and the URI Foundation being another. And we hope that they will reconsider as they get our letters this time around. So the report card, once we get the information in, we'll publish it. We'll also note who failed to respond and what people's current status is, and hopefully people will change their minds about not responding. And then that's the beginning of a campaign to get the decarbonization of banking and investments throughout the state. And so we'll be picking sort of our top priorities, probably by size and where we have more influence, and asking them to divest. So that's what we're doing, that's what we're working on. To quote the UN Secretary General, everything, everywhere, all at once needs to happen, right, to stop what's going on. And the UN has called for stopping all licensing or funding of new oil and gas, and stopping any expansion of existing reserves in coal and also in oil and gas. So ending all of this is critical, and it's already almost too late. But there is hope if we act, if everybody acts, and we can make that happen now. So we have a couple of folks to add to this. I didn't mention yet, but will, the Treasurer's Office. So under our last treasurer, the Treasurer's Office decided to divest, and 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they were at 50% divestment, and we have with us Mark Lebeau from the Treasurer's Office to tell us a little bit about what's happening there.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. As Gayle said, my name is Mark Lebeau. I'm General Treasurer James Diosa's press secretary. Since taking office, General Treasurer Diosa has prioritized addressing the climate crisis and making it a core priority of his agenda. Earlier this year, the Treasurer met with Climate Action Rhode Island to discuss how we can collaborate on spreading the important message of the value in decarbonization. Following that conversation with the Treasurer and his office, we recognize that to combat the existential threat that climate change poses, we need to establish partnerships with green leaders, otherwise Rhode Island's future is in jeopardy. As we have seen from warmer than usual weather this winter and years past, rising sea levels, climate change is already having impacts on our state. Treasurer Diosa looks forward to continuing his work with organizations and municipalities to pivot away from fossil fuels once and for all. And the Treasurer's Office would like to seek investment opportunities that are in line with our climate goals while maintaining our fiduciary responsibilities to the people of Rhode Island. And as we collaborate, you're always welcome to contact our office with any questions. So, thank you to everyone.
Once we have our last speaker, who's just about to come up, then we'll open up for questions for everyone. I'd like to introduce Michelle Cortez Harkins of Harkins Wealth Management to speak to us about the risks, concerns about investing in fossil fuels, just in case you're not convinced yet.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you. My name is Michelle Cortez Harkins. I'm a financial planner. Our investment firm is fossil fuel free. And I want to thank Gayle and Climate Action Rhode Island for allowing me to speak today. It's really an interesting time to talk about banks, right? So the banking industry has a history of corporate governance controversies, and there are many social risks often in the spotlight, especially as they relate to financial inclusion or community lending. There's also a major risk to investors who use banks that are not integrating ESG principles, and those are environmental, social, and governance. And I know you spoke a bit about fiduciary duty, and I strongly believe that not using those metrics when you're looking at an investment opportunity is a breach of fiduciary duty. So really the risk that banks have is based on the banking sector's lack of preparation for climate change by continuing banking relationships around manufacturing, agriculture, construction, and transportation, with the majority of current bank lending in climate-exposed sectors. So despite this, few banks have made high-level climate-related commitments or risk disclosures, and mainly plainly separate their sustainability strategy from their financing activities. So divestment from fossil fuels and low-carbon investing strategies have gained attention and traction from foundations, public pensions, and individual investors. So according to Fossil Free, a project of 350.org, institutions and individuals worldwide representing about 40 trillion in assets have already made commitments. And I don't know if you saw in the news this week, but Vermont is actually in the process of passing a bill to divest their pension plan from fossil fuels by 2031. So really, what is fossil fuel divestment? So it's either the partial or total exclusion of companies that are engaged in the extraction or production of coal, oil, or natural gas. And so there's a lot of different ways to look at this. So divestment can mean excluding everything, so just taking out all fossil fuels. Some say, let's just take out the top 200 fossil fuel companies. And then there's others that say, let's just take out coal and oil sands projects, but not natural gas. So I think one of the areas that really falls short, and particularly for many individuals, is financial disclosures. And so what is the quality of the information that you're getting? And is there a general standard as to which we are measuring all of these investments? So whenever you're evaluating a company, investors should know if assets are physically vulnerable, the volume of greenhouse gases it emits, and what its plans are for lowering emissions. But even with all this transparency, there is a lack of standardization and a huge problem that we need to overcome if corporate emissions are going to be compared. So we need a way to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So within banking, the Sears Bank Risk Report found that the major risk to banks is based on a lack of preparation for climate change by banking's climates around manufacturing, agriculture, construction, and transportation, and that the majority of bank lending right now is in climate-exposed sectors. So Sears found that over half of syndicated lending within U.S. banks is exposed to climate transition risk, with lending in sectors such as fossil fuels, utilities, and energy-intensive sectors. So banks really need to be prepared for sudden shifts in these sectors due to emissions reductions and changes in customer sentiment. So one way that we can all do this is through engagement, which is what's happening today. And there was a really interesting report put out by Calvert Mutual Fund, which is called Through the Looking Glass, assessing 250 of the largest carbon emitters for transparency. And so what they found is that 95% of publicly listed companies disclose emissions data, while only 32% of private companies do. So just showing that public awareness is a big catalyst to actually getting carbon emissions reduced. So within the banking sector, in Europe, they're way ahead of us in terms of looking at what risks may look like. They look at firm emissions, location, climate transition, and adaptation strategies, and that really leads to better lending, underwriting, and asset management. So if you're assessing a bank and you're saying, okay, well, is this a bank that fits for me and it's going to fit my needs and my values? There are a few things that you can look at. So there are banks that are members of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. So the network of banks represents a diverse range of institutions that serve the real economy. They share a mission of using finance to deliver on sustainable development. And they focus on helping individuals fulfill their potential by building stronger communities. You can also look for banks that have B Corp certification. So they're certified to meet the highest standards of verified ESG performance, public transparency, and legal accountability. Also, banks that participate in the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, or CDFIs. So these are mission-driven financial institutions that take a market-based approach to supporting generating growth within communities and opportunities in communities by putting in new sources of capital into neighborhoods that lack access to funding. You can also find out if they're signatories of the United Nations Principles of Responsible Banking, or the PRB. This framework ensures that bank strategies and practices align with Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. More than 1/3 of the global banking industry has signed on to report their impact and targets and disclose their progress. Also, are they a bank that has set science-based targets, or SBTs? These banks have committed to set emission reduction targets in line with science for a well below 1.5 degree future scenario. This includes banks' financed emissions, which is the most ambitious and leading position to take towards driving an environmental sustainable economy. And lastly, it's a bank that has joined the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. These are banks that are assessing and disclosing the greenhouse gas emissions associated with their loans and investments. This is considered the best practice for managing a bank's climate impact. So I want to thank you again for allowing me to speak, and thank you, Gayle.
And I have a couple resources for you all. Peter Gill Case, who is on the Energy Efficiency, and Resource Management Commission for the state, who lives in Providence, is also part of, or has formed an organization called Bank Forward, which is members of the Rockefeller family, which he is. And they're petitioning and have been meeting with big banks in order to get them to move away from fossil fuel funding. They've just put out a calculator on their website. So it's bankfwd.org, toolkit calculator. You'll find it. It's a personal calculator. And you can put, if you're in the top 5 banks, if you bank there, you can put in how much money you have those banks, and it'll tell you how to move to a lower, less costly, more green bank. So it'll show you the huge reduction in carbon emissions. And so one of the things that they haven't said yet, but want to say, is that for those of you and for organizations and businesses and governmental agencies that have plans in order to reduce their carbon emissions, if you're banking in one of these banks, or if you're investing in fossil fuels, you are undercutting everything that you are doing. And one of the projects that Peter has worked on is something called the Carbon Bankroll, carbonbankroll.com. And that's a look at the top companies in the United States in terms of their emissions and also their fossil fuel banking and investments. And they have found that the impact in terms of emissions from their banking and investments is anywhere from like 11 to 30 something times the amount of emissions that they release. And that includes companies like Amazon and Microsoft. In fact, Microsoft's banking and investments are greater than all the emissions of all Microsoft users plus the company worldwide. So that's the impact, and that's why this is important. And that's why we all need to do our part, right? Everything, everywhere, all at once. Let's keep that in mind for everybody, because our grandkids depend on it. So I'll take questions if there are any. Yeah, Greg.
In Rhode Island especially, one of our big vulnerabilities is sea level rise. And a lot of that vulnerability is because we have a lot of buildings next to it. Are we looking at the real estate investment and trying to get people from divesting, from putting things in harm's way?
Well, that's maybe the next line. In this project, as we looked at the top 100 nonprofits, what we did was to look at their non-fixed asset investments and also the amount of revenues that they have coming in that flow through the banks. And that's how we classified folks. So we haven't gotten to that level yet, but bringing up sea level rise, we were all under, initially the impression, right, that this was a gradual thing. But what we understand is it's a snowball, right? It's a snowball. And Greenland, which has most of the ice on land, isn't just going to slowly melt. What's happening is it's fissuring, and the ice is just one day going to float right off. And then, guess what? That sea level rise that everybody's waiting all these years that's going to happen is going to happen virtually overnight. So it's not, there is no time. We have to do this, and that needs to be our message out there. Other questions?
As you issue your report cards down the road, what does a passing grade look like and what does a failing grade look like?
I think at the a failure we know, we think we haven't done it yet,
Okay.
right? But we think failure may include those who had the choice to make and didn't, like intentionally chose the wrong path, and that we will encourage them, of course, to choose the right path. But we haven't figured out the grading yet.
How will people be able to access the report card once you've done it?
Yeah, so we plan to hopefully, actually we haven't had this conversation yet, but put it online so that it will be available to everybody, and then we'll also be able to update it as we move forward.
And we'll send it out on the carriers.
Yeah, it'll go out.
Okay.
And of course, more press as well. But we do want to make it available online. David? Yeah.
I want to applaud what you're doing. The whole group, I think, is fabulous, and it's focused, and it's business-like, and very tangible information that you're looking for. What would be fabulous, because Local Return and other organizations are really saying you should all pull your money. If anybody has their money in any of the major banks, shame on you. We should all be putting our money into community banks, partly because none of them are investing, as far as we know, in fossil fuels, but it also keeps the money locally. To me, that's the bigger campaign. Wouldn't it be great to see gradually the Bank of America branches, the Chase branches, the TD American branches fund gradually closing because all the deposits are being taken out? So anyway, that's my sharing.
We actually have been in touch with Jessica David at Local Return, and wanted to know how, to coordinate. Local Return will be doing a campaign next month to get folks also to move their money into local banking because it builds community wealth, as David said. The credit unions and local banks have much lower carbon footprints, much lower. I think we heard officially from Navigant that their fossil fuel investments are less than 1% of their investments right now, and they continue to bring them down. But you can see just the difference on that calculator if they just don't compare to the top 6 or 60 even. Yeah.
How easy is it for a consumer like me to call up a company and say, you're my insurance company, who do you bank with? And would they give that information freely, or is there a lot more hoops?
Well, we know Liberty Mutual is actually insuring a lot of fossil fuel investments, so they're high on the list. Anyone? It's, if it's publicly traded, you're probably more likely to be able to get that kind of information. If you're a really great customer, hopefully they will give you that information. If you just call customer service, they probably don't have a clue. Right? So you may have to go higher to get that information. Yeah, I don't know if our top list, if the top 60 really is focused on financial institutions, but I'm sure that there's information out there about the insurers as well. Yeah.
What kind of pushback have you been experiencing? Have you?
Actually, so we originally sent letters to all of the mayors and council presidents and town managers, administrators, and Warren and West Warwick opened their mail, and Warren responded very quickly. Everybody else doesn't remember receiving any of our letters. For 2 of them. So after a consultation with the city solicitor, or the town solicitor for West Warwick, we reissued Access to Public Records Act requests to all of the cities and towns via email. And we have their attention because they are supposed to respond in 10 days. And so they are all in the process of pulling things together for us. We had to kind of restructure the ask because originally we had a survey that asked, do you bank with any of these banks? Where are your investments? What are the amounts? But apparently, as I've been learning about access to public records, you don't actually have to answer questions. You just have to provide documents. So we had to switch the ask to, give us proof of your banking and whatever. Thankfully, the folks who are very, very cooperative so far, the people I've been dealing with, have been just answering some of the questions as well as providing some of the documentation. But it's ironic because we're kind of back to the surveys, which would have been a heck of a lot easier for them to answer than having to sort through and give us reams of files on their investments. So it's interesting. But otherwise, we haven't gotten pushback yet. We will later today, but I expect that when the report card comes out, we'll be hearing from folks. Yeah.
Cool.
Anyone else? Yeah.
One step above individuals divesting from these banks is the level of financial advisors who direct the investments for many hundreds of individuals. So if you know financial advisors or know people who do it or use one, maybe for yourself, for a union, for your school, for your organization. In my experience, they need to be educated because they're not really involved or interested, but they are educatable. So financial advisors, it's a good place to focus as well.
Michelle, do you want to speak to that? Because I know you're involved in a lot of, but you are involved with a lot of associations in the financial advising and planning world that in fact are looking at these issues.
There are, definitely advisors who very much are well versed in divesting from fossil fuels or use the ESG framework for their work. Also, there is a designation, the CSRIC, which I have, which means that you're focused on committing yourself to socially sustainable investment.
All right, Brian, do you want to tell us what happens next?
Yeah, going over to the banks on Westminster Street. There's 3 offices over there. Some people are cutting up some cards and closing accounts, but mostly we're there to let them know that this is the beginning of getting more individuals, more institutions to take a stand where our money goes. And so join us. We're going to meet outside at the steps in the front of the City Hall. Whatever we have in terms of changes at the bank, we'll deliver to the bank staff. And we'll be done in about a half hour.